If you live in the real world, you want to hear what Dr. Bruce Rubenstein has to say.
If you live in the spiritual world, you will want to hear what Rabbi Shea Hecht has to say.
We may agree,
And we may disagree.
but you want to hear both views.
So let's get right to it. Hi there, and welcome to another episode of the Rabbi and the Therapist. It is now Sukkot, so we both want to wish all of you a very Chag Sameach, or a very Sameach Chag. And today we're going to be talking about something that has mixed emotions to it. We're approaching the anniversary, the first anniversary of the tragedy that occurred on October 7th last year, coinciding with the holiday of Simchat Torah, which is supposed to be a holiday filled with happiness and joy. Rabbi, how was your fast?
My fast was okay, and I'm always happy in the week of Sukkot.
Yeah?
Sukkot is, it really shifts. First of all, just if I can throw in a little Dvar Torah,
Go right ahead.
say Sukkot is the holiday that God says, I love you. Because in the Talmud, it discusses that a sukkah can either have 4 walls, 3 walls, or 2.5 walls. And I say Sukkot is the time where God gives us a hug. We hug sometimes somebody completely. We sometimes hug him like 3, or sometimes we just hug him like with one hand.
Nice.
So it's the yontif that God says, I love you. And it is true. 5 weeks ago, when we were preparing for Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, Simchat Torah, and within sort of in the planning rooms of the rabbis, exchanging ideas for what we're going to talk about, Rosh Hashanah, what's your Yom Kippur is going to, but how are you going to advertise Simchat Torah this year? And it is tough. Simchat Torah, come back and we're going to commemorate. What are we going to commemorate? But I take it and I make it a little bit more global, the whole concept. October 7th, the pride of Jewish people went down tremendously. I don't want to say some of the terminology that people use it's not very modest. It went down all the way. And a few weeks ago, when Israel was accredited to pulling off the most genius, I don't know what you want to call it, technological miracle with beepers and then walkie-talkies and then with the bombing of the head of Hezbollah, and you say to yourself, you know what? The pride of the Jewish people went back up. And when we dance with the Torah, but when we dance, it's because we feel good. So the first thing I'm going to say is separating it a little bit from last year, as we refer to it as October 7th, last year's Simchat Torah. Guess what, guys? There's tremendous pride in the era. Jews all over the world are proud to be Jewish. Jews who look like me, and Jews who don't look at all Jewish. You know, I was going to say Jews look like you. Jews of every type. And I've seen it in the last few weeks. They simply took some level of identification, some level of connection with the Jewish people and with Israel. So I think Simchat Torah in my shul is going to be very happy.
I hope so. I have to imagine, though, that there are people listening to this who, notwithstanding the amazing feat of the Israeli intelligence services, not to mention everything else they've done recently to the assassination of Haniya and Nasrallah, but people have had a sort of a pit in their stomach ever since last October 7th. They think about the hostages who are still not home. And although clearly the accomplishments of the IDF and the Israeli intelligence has given people hope, has made them feel less helpless and more empowered, they're still left with, boy, on the day that God shows us that, well, shortly after he shows us he loves us, gave us Torah, this horrible thing happened, and they're still feeling ambivalent about it. How would you guide them as to how to reconcile two very, very disparate feelings?
As a rabbi and as a religious Jew, I don't have an answer. I have not heard an answer throughout this year of why this tragedy, why God allowed this tragedy to take place on Simchat Torah. It doesn't make sense to me. Is it God testing us? And we can sit in the halls of the yeshiva, in the academy, and we can discuss it philosophically in many, many other ways. As a chassid, the only thing that makes sense is that simcha poretz geder, which is actually a Talmudic expression, it breaks through all boundaries. And somehow, if you have joy, and somehow joy can override everything, even the most negative. So, no, I'm not suggesting an answer. I'm not sticking up for God and defending him, why it took place. I still have the questions. But being that some of us are going to be in shul in a few days, or some of us are going to watch this afterwards, please understand that the energy of simcha is so strong that it can change any darkness into light, any difficulty, any challenge into joy and happiness and celebration.
It raises a thought in my mind that I'll throw out, that I see people in my profession who, not on this scale, but they will say, for example, I married off my child the same day my parent died, right? Something bitter with something sweet occurring exactly at the same time, right? I have to wonder whether being put in that kind of situation, getting away from either you're happy or you're sad, either you're joyous or you're mournful, but whether being challenged by those two disparate things at the same time is not meant to motivate us, to elevate us to even a higher place. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Commentary Rashi points out in the beginning of Chayei Sarah that it was the contrast that killed Mother Sarah. On one hand, she heard, wow, my son was a sacrifice for God. And then, no, actually, he was not a sacrifice for God. And that contrast is what really sort of broke her heart. Contrast is a difficulty, and I think you should speak to that more than I. But when they are not simultaneous, I think we have, human beings that I find is, we do have a much greater latitude than we think. We talk about children being resilient. But in truth, every single person, we can go up and down a lot more than we think. People say, oh, I can't take it. Relax. You can take it. We know how to deal with it. Sometimes we have the tools. Sometimes we don't. Sometimes pain is a good thing to experience for many, many, many reasons. And surely joy and happiness is a good thing to experience. And sometimes we can ride the roller coaster and it could be just fine. The question is, if both are simultaneous, what then happens? By nature, this is not Talmudic, by nature I say focus on the joy, and that will give you the power to deal with the loss and deal with the pain. I'm not sure if medically that works out as far as a therapist.
Yeah. I don't think that positive thinking is very powerful, but you can't simply invoke it. at the drop of a hat. I would go back to what I mentioned earlier, that I think that the confluence of what is seemingly two completely contrary and disparate phenomena occurring at the same time potentially forces us to rise up at a higher level. I'll just tell you what it reminds me of, which is something that you're much more familiar with than I, that they say that the higher you go up on the ladder of holiness, there is no differentiation between good and evil, right?
Well, it's interesting. Fire and water, Malach Michael and Malach Gabriel, one representing fire, one representing water, they're a contradiction down in this world. But as you go to a higher level, there's no contradiction.
Exactly.
They're friends. Those angels of fire, the angel of water, they're friendly, and they can coexist. Yeah, so on a spiritual level, by simply going to a higher level, it doesn't answer God's why God allowed things to happen, but there's a lot of questions what we have on God, and we move forward.
That's a question for down here, but I think you just answered it. That situations like these in life, they compel us to at least strive to elevate ourselves and transcend ourselves to higher levels, even acknowledging the fact, I don't understand it, right? I chuckle a little when I hear the more famous proponents of atheism base their entire atheism on the fact that if there were a good God, God wouldn't have allowed this and this and this and this and this. It's a weak, almost pathetic argument. I do think that situations like this compel us to transcend ourselves in this lifetime with the acceptance and humility that we may not understand the rationale for everything.
That works for the very spiritual person.
Not only
Can it work for the person who's not spiritual, as a doctor, as a therapist? Can you say to the person, hey, rise above it, and it seems to work out a little bit better?
You know what we say to them? You don't have any other choice. And they don't. Because as you very articulately stated, you're never going to be able to reconcile it on a rational earthly basis. So really, you don't have a choice. You can now try to rise to the occasion, right? And immerse yourself in a more spiritual plane, or you can stay down here and be reactive to whatever circumstance happens to you. We do see this actually in people who have no spiritual background, but who experience in life a tremendous, tremendous fall. Yeah.
So you're
sometimes at the very moment that things are going extremely well. Yeah.
So you're a doctor, you're friendly with a lot of rabbis, particularly within the Chabad movement. Yeah. So if a rabbi called you up and said, listen, I want to ask you a technical question. Simchat Torah is coming. What should I do? Do I get up and mention what took place a year ago? Should I avoid what it takes to go? Which one should I do first? Should I say L'chaim first, dance first, and then commemorate and then dance? Simply on a humanistic level, and as a doctor dealing with human emotions, what would you advise?
We're asked that question actually quite a lot, not in relationship to Simchat Torah. And our recommendation to people is that they go and they engage in the joyful experience. And while they're going through that, continue to be mindful of that other darker side. Don't try to separate it out from your mind, forget it, ignore it, be mindful of it, but let your actions, dictated by that day in this case, supersede what you would normally do if you were only to act according to the emotions of very dark memories.
As you started giving that answer, something came to mind.
What is that?
When the Rebbe would talk about very sad issues, for instance, the Rebbe, I believe it was 1972, discussed about the Holocaust. You know what day he chose to talk about it? Was Simchat Torah. Other tragedies, where he chose the Farbringen for Purim, specifically on the highest days of joy, that the Rebbe then said, we can take a moment and talk about what you call the dark moments or the dark experiences within Torah, Yiddishkeit, Judaism, Jews, etc.
Right.
And I'm wondering if that sort of is a Torah plan that engage, move in a spirit of happy. Well, again, if we go back to what I said earlier, that Simcha Poritz Geder, when a person is joyful, we expand. And if we expand, our mind expands, our heart expands, our pocket expands. People give more money when they're happy. They simply celebrate. They're in a great mood. And maybe that's the way that we can then also expand to understand or receive or commemorate negative things. Remember,
or transcend. I would just make one comment. I think this is right. I also think the conversation we're having is at a very, very high level. I would warn people, there are people out there that will give the same advice, but in a simplistic way, meaning, no, go out there and be happy, and that'll make you forget the darkness. That is not what we're talking about.
Right. You did not say anything about forgetting. We said, on the contrary, we're going to focus
we keep
on
mindful
that negative.
of it. Exactly.
You know, also, it's interesting that every holiday we say the prayer of Yizkar to remember the loss of my father, my mother, my loved ones. And I always, rabbis talk about it from the pulpit. You know, it's you're really happy now? Well, let's take a moment and talk about a deep pain. Because losing a loved one is something that stays with you forever.
Forever.
You know?
What are you talking about? 3 times a day. Go say Kaddish. Not one mention of death in there.
Right.
Not one. But we know why we're saying it.
Right.
You know? So I think this whole concept of transcendence with such bipolar types of human experiences is critically important for us to address. Unfortunately, we don't have any more time to talk about it right now. So why don't you tell everyone where they can communicate with us should they have any questions or want further discussion about it?
Well, first of all, thanks again for listening to another program of The Rabbi and The Therapist. And if you care to let us know what you think or have any questions, on the bottom of your screen, you can please let us know. Feedback is very, very important. And do let your friends know that there are more, and we invite them to more episodes of The Rabbi and The Therapist.